Solomon Price was 39 years old, a civil engineer who had spent 14 years doing work that required precision and received almost none of the attention that precision deserves. He drove a dark green Jeep with 117,000 miles on it. He carried his lunch to the site in the same insulated bag he'd used for 3 years. He was the first person at his firm's projects in the morning, not because he had been told to be, but because he needed 20 minutes alone before anyone else arrived, to walk the perimeter, check the sequencing, look at what the night had done to the work. That was his habit. That was how he thought. The morning his wife asked him to move out, he was back from the site by 7 in the evening. He came in through the garage. The house was lit from every window. There were 4 cars in the driveway that weren't his. He could hear music before he had the door open. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his wife Nadine and 6 of her friends arranged around the living room, glasses raised, and understood before she said a word that this was not a coincidence. She had known he was coming home. She had planned around it. She crossed the room and told him, with 4 of her friends watching, that she wanted him out before the weekend. She had no idea what she was asking him to leave behind. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was ready at 5:20 in the morning. Solomon knew this without looking at the clock. He was already dressed. Solomon Price had spent 14 years in civil engineering, the last 5 as a project manager at a mid-sized infrastructure firm in Baltimore called Hartwell Group. He managed water systems, mostly drainage retrofits, stormwater infrastructure, the unglamorous work that kept roads from flooding and basements from filling. It was technical, invisible, and essential, and he had become quietly excellent at it in the way that people become excellent at things when no one is watching them closely. He drove the green Jeep and carried the insulated bag and wore a hard hat with a small dent on the left side from a site incident 3 years ago that he had never gotten around to replacing. He was the kind of man who tracked everything: project timelines, material tolerances, budget variances, in a composition notebook he kept in the breast pocket of his jacket. Not on his phone, in the notebook. Because he wanted to be able to read it anywhere, under any conditions, without needing a signal. He had applied that same precision to everything in his life, except, for a long time, what was happening in his own home. He had co-signed on Nadine's boutique fitness studio 4 years ago. Not because he believed in the business model, the numbers had never been quite right, but because she had asked, and because he believed in her when she was certain about something. He had spent a weekend rewiring the electrical in the studio space when the contractor she'd hired walked off the job, because the permit deadline was in 3 days and she needed it done. He had done it correctly. On time. Without complaint. He hadn't told her about the other thing he had been building. He would later mark that Thursday evening in the lit kitchen doorway as the last time he was willing to pretend he hadn't noticed what was already ending. The music was still going when he came in. That was the first thing. She hadn't even paused it. Nadine was standing near the kitchen island when Solomon came through the garage door. She was wearing a dress he hadn't seen before, something new, something chosen for tonight specifically. Her friends, Mara, Keisha, and 2 women he knew only by first name, went quiet when they saw him. Not surprised, he could tell that. Quiet the way people go quiet when they have been briefed. Nadine crossed the room. She took the insulated bag out of his hand and set it on the counter. She looked at him with an expression that was calm in the way that rehearsed things are calm. "We need to talk," she said. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. "I need you to find somewhere else to stay for a while." She paused. "Then, I think we both know this hasn't been working." Her friends had found things to look at, Two of them had drifted toward the living room. Mara stayed. Mara had always stayed for things like this. "How long have you been planning this?" Solomon asked. "That's not tonight," he said. "How long did you know I was coming home?" She didn't answer that. He looked at the room, the lit candles, the playlist still running soft from the speaker, the 5 glasses on the counter, and then the 6th one near where she'd been standing, half full. He looked at it for a moment. He noticed it. He filed it away. "All right," he said. "I know it's a lot," Nadine started. "I know. I'll need a few days to arrange something." "I was thinking the weekend," she said. Her voice had gone a little careful. She had expected more resistance. She had planned for more resistance. He didn't give it to her. "I'll be out by Friday," he said. He picked up the insulated bag from the counter. He walked back through the garage door. He sat in the Jeep in the driveway for 4 minutes. He could still hear the music through the walls. By the time he'd backed out of the driveway, it had gotten louder. He drove to his brother Terence's apartment in Towson and asked if he could use the couch for a week. Terence said yes before he finished asking. He did not call Nadine that night. He did not text. He sat on Terence's couch and looked at the composition notebook in his hands and thought about the sequencing, about what needed to happen next and in what order and how long it would take. The year before all of it, Solomon had started something that he had not talked about with Nadine. It had not started as a secret. It had started as a problem he noticed, the way he noticed all problems, gradually, and then with complete certainty. 5 years earlier, he had developed, on his own time, a stormwater modelling algorithm that could predict infrastructure stress points in aging urban drainage systems with a precision that existing municipal tools missed. He had written it over 14 months, working between 9 p.m. and midnight most nights on a laptop he kept in his home office. He had tested it against 3 real projects his firm managed. It had been correct on all 3, flagging issues that weren't caught by the standard assessment until 17 months later, when the problems became visible on site. He had shown it to his firm's managing director. The managing director had found it interesting. He had not moved on it. He had not moved on it the second time Solomon raised it, either, so Solomon had taken it to someone else. Her name was Diana Osai. She was a 58-year-old former infrastructure consultant who had spent 27 years advising municipal water authorities and had retired early, as she told Solomon over coffee the first time they met, because she was bored by the pace of institutional decision-making. She had a network that crossed 14 states. She had read Solomon's algorithm documentation over one weekend and called him the following Monday at 7 in the morning. "This is real," she said. "Do you know what you have?" "I know what it does," he said. "That's enough," she said. "Let me tell you what it's worth." What it was worth, as Diana had begun to lay out over the following months, was considerably more than Solomon had allowed himself to think about. Municipalities were spending billions on infrastructure retrofits with inadequate predictive data. What Solomon had built could reduce that waste by modelling the failures before they happened. Diana had introduced him to 2 engineers she trusted. They had formed a company, quietly, carefully, without announcement, called Groundwork Systems. Solomon held 51%. Diana held 24%. The remaining 25% was split between the 2 engineers. Groundwork had 3 municipal contracts in the first year. Then 5. Then a partnership inquiry from a regional utility authority that Diana said could be the beginning of something much larger. He had not told Nadine. He had intended to. Each time he had started to think about how, she had been in the middle of something. The studio expansion, the new equipment financing, the partnership disagreement with her co-instructor. There was always a next moment that seemed more right. Then the moment passed. He had told himself she was too busy. That was what he had chosen to believe. The truth was simpler and less comfortable. He had seen, over 3 years, the way she looked at his work, the careful absence of questions about it, the way she answered when her friends asked what he did, infrastructure stuff, with a tone that suggested the conversation had already run its length. He had noticed. He had filed it away. He had kept building. That was what she hadn't understood. Until the Thursday she turned the music up while his taillights were still visible at the end of the driveway. Diana called him on Friday morning, the day after he moved his things to Terence's apartment. He had left her a voicemail the night before, brief, factual, nothing more than the outline of what had changed. She had listened to it and waited until morning. "Where are you?" she said. "Towson. My brother's." "Good. That works." A pause. "I need you in the office Monday. There's been a development with the Chesapeake Authority contract." He knew from her tone what kind of development it was. "Good or better?" he asked. "Better," she said. She reached over her desk. He could hear papers moving, and he imagined her the way he always imagined her when they were on the phone, straight-backed, silver-haired, reading glasses pushed up. "Are you all right?" "I will be," he said. "That's the correct answer." A short pause. "Eat this weekend. Come in rested on Monday. I'm going to need you clear." He was clear on Monday. The Chesapeake Bay Regional Water Authority had been evaluating Groundwork's modelling platform for 8 months. Their infrastructure division had run it against 3 years of their own instant data. It had identified pre-failure indicators in 14 cases they could verify against their records. They wanted a full deployment agreement. They also wanted a consulting partnership for a 12-state consortium study. The total contract value was $47 million over 5 years, with an option to extend. Solomon sat in the conference room at Diana's office in Fells Point while she walked through the term sheet. He listened. He looked at the numbers. He thought about the 14 months of 9 p.m. nights on the laptop. The 3 test cases, the managing director who had not moved on it. "Before you react," Diana said, watching him, "there's one more thing." She slid a printed email across the table. It was from a researcher at the Forbes Infrastructure and Innovation Desk, dated 6 days ago. They had been following the Chesapeake process. They wanted to include Groundwork Systems in a feature on emerging infrastructure technology companies. They specifically wanted to include Solomon. The researcher had written, "We'd like to run the company's story alongside Mr. Price's background, the engineering origin, the development timeline, the founding. We believe it's exactly the kind of story our readers need to see right now." Solomon looked at the email. He thought about the composition notebook, the 9 p.m. nights, the Thursday evening in the lit kitchen, the music that hadn't paused. He looked at Diana. He looked at the contract term sheet. "All right," he said. She reached over and refilled his coffee. He didn't move fast. That was the part no one was accounting for. Diana had introduced him to an attorney named Carl Webb 3 months into Groundwork's formation, a corporate and intellectual property specialist who had been methodical from the first meeting, asking questions about every instrument, every filing, every agreement Solomon had signed before Groundwork existed. "I need to understand your full financial exposure," Webb had said at that first meeting, "not just what you know about. Everything that could be argued." Solomon had given him everything: the co-signature on the studio loan, the joint accounts, the home equity line. Webb had read all of it and said very little, which Solomon had learned was what Webb did when he was thinking. Webb had also, quietly and without announcement, filed the Groundwork founding documents, the IP assignment, and the equity structure in a way that created a clean, unambiguous line between Solomon's personal financial exposure and the company. "This is standard for a founder in your position," Webb had told him. "It's also correct. I want it airtight before the first contract." It was airtight. Solomon had not fully appreciated, at the time, why Webb had been so thorough. He appreciated it now. He called Webb the same Friday he spoke with Diana. Webb was already aware of the situation. Solomon had told him 2 weeks earlier that the marriage was likely ending, in the same way he told Webb everything, plainly in sequence, without drama. Webb had made a note. He had said, "Let me check a few things." What Webb had checked was the co-signature on the studio loan, the joint account history, the home equity instruments. He had also, on his own initiative, reviewed the groundwork corporate structure against the state's marital asset statutes. His conclusion, delivered the following Tuesday morning over the phone: the groundwork equity is not a marital asset. It was formed from IP you developed prior to the marriage and capitalized entirely from pre-marital personal accounts. The filing structure Diana's team used is correct. It holds. Solomon was quiet for a moment. He looked at the composition notebook on Terence's coffee table. "And the studio loan?" he asked. "You co-signed. That's your exposure. We'll negotiate around it." Webb paused. "It's manageable." "Okay, don't do anything yet," Webb said. "The Forbes piece, when does it run?" "They said 6 weeks." "Good." Another pause. "I want the dissolution process to begin before the piece appears." "That's the correct order of operations." Solomon filed for dissolution the following Monday. He did not notify Nadine in advance. He did not send a message. He had his attorney serve the papers through proper channels, professionally and without theatre. Nadine called him that evening. He let it go to voicemail. Her message was long. The tone moved through 3 phases in under 2 minutes: surprised, then conciliatory, then something that wasn't quite pressure, but was heading toward it. She mentioned the studio. She mentioned the co-signature. She mentioned that she hoped he wasn't letting his brother influence things. He listened to it once, not because it affected him, because he wanted to note the exact sequence of her concerns. He wanted to understand the shape of what she thought she had leverage over. She thought the studio loan was the whole picture. She thought the co-signature was the thing he would be afraid to disturb. She had spent 3 years inside a life with him and had not known what he was building at 9 p.m. on the laptop in the home office. That was exactly where Webb needed her to be. Solomon arrived at the offices of Hartwell Group, his firm, the one he had given 14 years to, 18 minutes early for a meeting he had requested. He liked it that way. The conference room was on the 4th floor. The morning light came in flat and grey from the north-facing window. Long table, white walls, a white board with some notations still on it from a previous meeting. The managing director, a man named Philip Gorman, arrived at 5 minutes past 9 with his assistant and a legal representative from HR. They arranged themselves across the table. Solomon had brought Carl Webb. Gorman looked at Webb. Then at Solomon. He had the expression of a man recalibrating. Solomon had requested the meeting for one purpose: to formalize his separation from Hartwell Group. He had been planning it for 4 months. He had been careful not to accelerate it, not because of Nadine, but because he needed the Chesapeake contract signed before he re-signed. It had signed the previous Wednesday. Webb opened the folder. "Solomon has asked me to be here because there are a few items we want to address clearly before his departure." Webb's voice was even. He laid the first document on the table. It was the groundwork IP assignment. The filing that showed the algorithm had been developed entirely outside of Hartwell's jurisdiction, on personal time, on personal equipment with no company resources. This documentation establishes that Mr. Price's proprietary work was not developed within the scope of his employment agreement. We raised it once informally. We're raising it formally now. Gorman looked at the document. His legal representative looked at it. Solomon said nothing. Webb placed the second document. This was the Chesapeake Bay Regional Water Authority contract, the signature page, and the term summary. $47 million over 5 years. The room went quiet. Gorman read it. He looked up at Solomon. His expression had moved through something that was not quite surprise. Solomon had worked with the man for 7 years. He knew how precise Solomon was, but it had moved through it regardless. We are not here to create an adversarial situation, Webb said. Solomon has given this firm 14 years of excellent work, documented in his review record. We'd like a clean separation. Appropriate terms, no encumbrances on the IP, no non-compete that would attach to the groundwork work specifically. Gorman's legal representative began to say something about the Standard Employment Agreement's IP clause. Webb opened a third document. It was the clause itself, annotated. The standard clause covers work developed using company resources or during paid working hours. We have documentation establishing the specific development timeline, tools, and working hours for every version of the platform. None of it falls inside the clause's scope. He looked at the legal representative without any particular expression. We've had 2 partners in intellectual property law review this independently. Their assessments are in the supplemental. The silence that followed lasted about 8 seconds. Then Gorman said, "What are you asking for, Solomon?" Solomon had been quiet for the whole meeting. He looked at Gorman now, at the man who had found the algorithm interesting and had not moved on it. "Twice a clean separation," Solomon said. 2 weeks' notice, full vesting on my existing equity schedule, and a letter confirming no IP dispute. Gorman looked at him for a long moment. "All right," he said. Webb gathered the documents. Solomon stood, buttoned his jacket, and shook the hands at the table in sequence. He walked toward the conference room door. He stopped. He turned to Gorman. He said it quietly, not with anger, because it was simply true. "I showed you this twice. You had 5 years to move on it. I appreciate what I learned here." That part was real. He walked out without looking back. 6 weeks later, the Forbes feature ran. It was not a small placement. It ran in the print edition and the digital feature package under the heading Infrastructure's Hidden Architects, the engineers rebuilding America's water systems from the ground up. Solomon was the lead profile. There was a photograph taken at the Fells Point office, him at the standing desk with the composition notebook open, the Chesapeake contract visible on the board behind him. The piece ran 2,200 words. It described the algorithm, the 14 months of development, the 3 municipal contracts, the Chesapeake deal. It named Groundwork Systems. It named Solomon Price. Diana sent him a text at 6:47 in the morning, the day it went live. "It's up. Go look." He looked. He read it through once. He set his phone face down on the kitchen counter. He did not call anyone. He didn't need to. Terence called at 7:15. His college roommate called at 7:40. His mother called twice, back to back, both times going to voicemail because he was on a call with the Chesapeake Authority's project director about the deployment kickoff schedule. He heard about Nadine from Terence. Terence had been told by someone who had been in the room, one of the Friday night women, the one named Keisha, who apparently had complicated feelings about how that evening had gone. She had texted Terence with a screenshot. It was a photo of a phone screen showing the Forbes article, and below it, a string of messages in a group chat. Nadine had seen the article. Someone in the group had sent it with a laughing emoji, thinking it was about someone else. Nadine had responded, and then gone quiet for 12 minutes, and then responded again. What she had written in that second response was that she needed to stop looking at her phone. Solomon looked at the screenshot for a moment. Then he put his phone back down and picked up his coffee. It was 8:20 in the morning. He had a call at 9. He had a notebook full of things to get right. The dissolution was finalised 4 months later. The studio loan was addressed in the settlement. The groundwork equity was untouched, as Webb had documented it would be. Nadine received a fair share of the joint assets accumulated during the marriage. Not more. The things she had expected to claim were not there. She had not known what she was standing on. She had found out when it was already too late to matter. 3 months after the dissolution was final, Solomon was at his desk in the Fells Point office. His desk now, his name on the door, groundwork systems on the building directory in the lobby downstairs, when Diana knocked on the open door and set a printed sheet on the corner of his desk without a word. It was a note from the consortium study. 12 states. The extended contract option exercised. He looked at it. He thought about the 9 o'clock nights on the laptop. The composition notebook, which was now the 5th one in the series, he kept them in a row on the shelf behind his desk. The Thursday evening with the music through the walls. Diana was watching him from the doorway. "Good?" she said. "Good," he said. She left without making more of it. He answered the consortium's project manager's email within the hour. He gave them an accurate timeline. He intended to hit it. On a Wednesday evening in early March, Solomon was the last one in the Fells Point office. The city was visible through the east-facing window, the harbour lights, a container ship moving slow past the channel marker, the dark water between. He sat at the standing desk with the composition notebook open to a fresh page. The 5th notebook. He had written the date at the top. Below it, in the methodical shorthand he had used for 14 years, the outline of the next project, a stormwater system for a mid-sized municipality in western Pennsylvania. New engagement, referred by the Chesapeake Authority's project director. He wrote until he had the shape of it clear. Then he closed the notebook, put it in his jacket pocket, and turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.